Secrets and Spies presents Espresso Martini with Chris Carr and Matt Fulton.
Welcome everybody to episode 8 of Espresso Martini with myself, Chris Carr, and Matt Fulton. Matt, welcome. How are you today?
Hey Chris, I am doing good. I am excited to rant about some of the stuff we're going to get into today. It's been bugging me for a while, so I'm glad to have this outlet to vent my frustrations.
Good. Well, there we go. Yeah, it's been quite an interesting couple of weeks, really. So, so today we've got another jam-packed episode, and we're going to be discussing, obviously, the recent Pentagon leaks, as well as a Russian pro-war blogger who turned out to not actually be Russian. We've got a businessman taking money from Chinese spies, and a spy ship that's been spotted off the coast of Scotland. So, funnily enough, when I was just going through my notes before recording, I noticed a typo about spy ship. So I accidentally put spy shits off the coast of Scotland. So I don't know if that's more accurate or not, but there we go.
It's probably is. Probably is.
So yeah, beware.
We can roll with it.
So let's start with the leaks. I'm going to break our chat up just sort of into two sections because there's quite a bit to unpack. So first we'll look at the leaker himself and discuss what's known about him and his motivations, and then we'll take a look at what some of the leaks showed. So we'll start with who was the leaker and what motivated him. So if you bear with me, I'm gonna use an article that appeared in The Guardian called "Who is Jack Teixeira, the man arrested over Pentagon file leaks?" by Peter Beaumont, who was reporting for The Guardian newspaper. And so the key points: so Jack Teixeira is a 21-year-old National Guardsman who has been identified as the prime suspect in the leak of classified intelligence documents. He had been assigned to manage and troubleshoot computers and communication systems for the 102nd Intelligence Wing at Otis Air National Guard Base. Teixeira was identified as the leading figure in an online gaming chat group called Thug Shaker Central, fun name that is, on the social network Discord, where he posted and leaked classified documents. The invite-only Discord group consisted of about 30 people who shared an interest in guns, God, military gear, video games, and racist memes. Fun bunch. And the leaked documents were physically removed from a secure place and photographed by Teixeira. Details of the interior of Teixeira's childhood home matched details on the margins of some of the photographs of the leaked secret documents. Whoops. And Teixeira's mother confirmed that her son was a member of the Air National Guard and been working overnight shifts at the base on Cape Cod. Teixeira's alleged motive for leaking the documents was to impress his young friends in the chat group, and he was not a whistleblower. Teixeira had racist and anti-establishment views and was seen making racial and anti-Semitic slurs on camera. There are serious questions about how someone so young and emotionally insecure with racist and anti-establishment views could have been allowed access to highly classified intelligence, and how he was able to remove classified material from a secure site without raising suspicions. And I will say most of this seemed to be paper-based, so that's quite interesting. So, Matt, what are your thoughts and observations on Jack Teixeira and his motivations?
I don't know if that heavy sigh got picked up in the mic, but that's my first reaction to this.
That's a pretty good reaction.
I don't know why. Okay, I try to keep swearing to a minimum on these episodes, but I don't think that's going to happen today. So if you're listening and you have kids in the car or whatever, or in the area, I'm sorry, but this is just how it is today. I don't know why the fuck we bother to vet anybody or anything if this is the system that we have, allows this 21-year-old idiot kid who's been in the military for 2 years. You know, I think a lot of the vetting and the process behind this to get a security clearance, I think is still kind of rooted in like the 60s. You know, like they'll ask if you've ever used marijuana at some point. And if you answer yes to have ever using marijuana at any point in your life, you kind of can't get a security clearance unless you have sort of special connections to get it through. Never mind that marijuana is legal in most of the country at this point. you know?
Let's hope you don't have a tie-dye shirt with that marijuana.
Right. They'll ask you, like, are you gay in these security forms, as if that makes you predisposed to selling secrets to the Russians or something. But they apparently won't do their due diligence to see that, you know, yeah, this idiot kid is sharing racist memes and stuff with his teenage internet friends. You know, like, I think if okay, so this Discord server that he was a part of, like you said in the intro, was called Thug Shaker Central, I think, right? Which is, and I don't add this to be gratuitous, but I guess the joke behind this name, it's like a gay porn meme. I don't know. Don't Google it, I guess.
At least I do it on a government or work computer.
Yeah, don't do it on your work computer if you must. But I think I don't add that to be gratuitous. I add that because I think it speaks to this kid's maturity.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? Like, he was the administrator of this Discord channel, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that would get past the Air Force, this sort of security vetting process. It's just insane to me, you know? And yeah, so he was an airman first class, fairly low level junior enlisted rank. As you said in the intro, he was a cyber transport systems journeyman, which is just a fancy way of saying an IT guy, for the 102nd Intelligence Wing of the Massachusetts Air National Guard at Otis Air National Guard Base on Cape Cod. And I know when this story broke with the guy's name, you know, who he was and everything, there was a lot of discussion about, you know, why does this random Air National Guard airman in Massachusetts have sort of unfettered access to, I guess it was JWICS that he accessed, which is the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System. So it's basically a separate server that kind of handles and processes a lot of intelligence reporting from all across the U.S. military and the intelligence community. But anyway, there's questions about, you know, why does he have unfettered access to this system? The mission of the 102nd Intelligence Wing, quoting from their website here, its mission is worldwide precision intelligence and command and control, along with trained and experienced airmen for expeditionary combat support and homeland security. So basically what that unit's mission is to sort of collate and bring together different intelligence sources from all across the community and sort of help package them into finished intelligence products and provide that to senior military leaders and combatant commanders. I believe this unit has more of a focus on U.S. European command. So I see why, yeah, an IT guy needs, and remember, Edward Snowden was an IT guy too.
Yeah.
I see why an IT guy needs access to these systems to do their job, but do you need access to all of the contents of those systems? You know, like, this kid has no need to know to be able to just get access to joint staff briefing materials that were compiled for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley. It's insane to me that, yeah, to go back to my first point, like, if this is who we let through the cracks, I don't know why we bother to vet anybody. I mean, this shit keeps happening, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And you look at, like, okay, the vectors for the exfiltration of this data for Chelsea Manning and the first batch of WikiLeaks documents, like all the cables and stuff that were dropped years ago. Chelsea Manning brought that information out through a CD-ROM drive, right? Burned it onto a CD. Edward Snowden got everything out on USB drives, right? And it seems that this kid just printed everything out on a printer and took it home.
Yeah.
Took it home. Hundreds of documents. I think the first one that we're aware of was from October of last year. It could have started before that, but I think the Washington Post, the documents that they've reviewed, the first one was from October. I don't know. So the U.S. military and the intelligence community has physically separate air-gapped systems depending on the classification level, right? So JWICS that I mentioned earlier is for information categorized at the top secret or sensitive compartmented information SCI level, right? Below that, just for secret or confidential information, is called CIPRNet. But these are physically separate systems. They're air-gapped, right?
Yeah.
So if you go into an office at Langley or Fort Meade or some military base somewhere else, you'll see there are separate phones. A lot of them are sort of like the faceplate on the phone will be a color corresponding to the classification level. It'll be like red or orange or something, right? And you'll have separate printers too, So if this kid prints it out, all these reports, briefing materials compiled for the Joint Staff, he would have to print them out on a printer that's specifically reserved for top secret level information.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. It's just, it seems to me just like a complete breakdown in counterintelligence, in the vetting process. I mean, yeah, to the point where I've mentioned this a couple times now that I don't know why we even bother anymore.
Yeah.
It was reported yesterday, so April 19th, it was reported that Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, he ordered the 102nd Wing to halt its intelligence gathering mission, pending an Air Force Inspector General review of the whole base.
Yeah. That's insane. Yeah.
I don't know, man. I think the FBI and the Air Force Inspector General, the Office of Special Investigations, they need to run a colonoscopy on this whole wing, this whole base, and people need to be fired for this. Like, careers need to be ended, and there needs to be a whole look top to bottom on the vetting process. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, multiple things. So first of all, I notice he comes from a military family, so that might explain maybe how he even got the job in the first place. I mean, it's a bit like you mentioned Snowden earlier, and I'm trying not to mention Snowden too much, but there are some similarities. Because Snowden went in as a security guard and ended up being an IT guy at the CIA. And it was through family connections he managed to get that job, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it's a interesting one. I think your point earlier about this sort of 1960s kind of view of vetting, I think is almost bang on, because here's the thing, and if there is a drinking game, and there's no Oleg Gordievsky today, but there is some other kind of classics that have come from these podcasts. So I'll put my Criminal Minds hat on. I think that Jack fits a familiar profile. Woohoo! If we consider the recent cases we've spoken about in the last few episodes about that top-level B&D officer who was found to be working for the Russians, and the UK security guard based at the Berlin embassy who gave information to Russian intelligence, they were both very conservative in their politics. They appeared to hold racist and anti-progressive views, and these may be one of the factors that attract them to working for Russia, which presents itself as the saviour of the white Christian world. Now, with Jack, he's reportedly expressed anti-government and anti-authority views. He even apparently expressed conspiratorial views about what the government knew about the Buffalo shooter. He comes from a Christian background. He's posted racial slurs online, and the very Discord group he was a part of apparently all admired President Putin and his regime and its war on Ukraine. And despite all of their kind of anti-government sentiment, they not one time criticised the Russian government for any of its decision-making or actions. And then if you look at leakers like Edward Snowden as well, he also expressed anti-authority views online in the past. There were even times when he was a little bit more right-wing outwardly in the past, and he now lives in Russia. So I think the key thing here is this anti-authority, anti-government kind of mindset that can both express itself in a right-wing or a left-wing view. And I think that's the commonality among a lot of these people, whether it be right-wing or left-wing. It's just this sort of anti-authority, anti-government kind of view that kind of comes in, and somehow that they know better and that they feel that they are, I don't know, in a position where they can sort of do things that make a difference and so on. So I don't know, there is something going on with this vetting process where people are not seeing what appears to be obvious when you kind of look on the outside in, to me at least. There just seems to be a pattern that connects everybody from that BND guy to the embassy guard to Snowden to then Jack Teixeira. I feel there's a similarity there. Obviously, I'm not an experienced counterintelligence professional, nor am I a criminal profiler by trade, but it certainly there are some things that it seem common, and there does seem to be a bit of a blind spot, because again, like, look at the way the FBI hasn't handled domestic terrorism very well, the January 6 attacks. You know, I would put Teixeira in that kind of, he's in that political spectrum where these January 6 people came from. You know, obviously, whether or not I'm not saying he's a rioter and all that, but I think his ideology seems to come from that area that inspired that. And they are typically very pro-Russia. And then, yeah, apparently another angle on all this, apparently Teixeira had been feeling isolated during the pandemic and turned to Discord as a way of making friends and a sense of connection. So, again, I don't know what the mental health policies are in place in the US Air Force, and unhappy people can end up going down dark paths, and in some cases those paths have led to espionage and leaks. So how are the military keeping an eye on the mental health and well-being of those who serve? Because, you know, spy history is littered with people who have felt disaffected in one way or another, and they've sort of ended up doing bad things. So there is definitely something there. As to his age, I mean, the military, generally the military is filled with people between 17 to 35 as a bracket. So more is the level of maturity and more the slipping through the cracks, I think, of the issue, than his age. Because he does sound to me like a particularly immature 21-year-old, but I've met other, I mean, hell, a 21-year-old guy produced my film when we made it, and I was in my mid-30s. So, so you know, 21-year-olds can be more than capable to do amazing things. And God, D-Day and many wars are fought by people between probably 17 to 20-something. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point you make about the age. The age isn't so much an issue, and yet most people in active duty and the military are sort of in that same range. But yeah, it's very much an issue of his maturity, and yeah, he had some problematic views. That's not illegal, you know. That's not. I don't think that's disqualifying from serving in the military.
No.
So to speak, but it is, it gets to a level where I think, do you trust this person with a top secret security clearance? I would say no, and clearly that's the case here. I don't think he's, the evidence that we have, you know, and he hasn't, there's been no sort of statements from him or his attorneys yet. I think he was supposed to have a hearing yesterday, and it got pushed off into early May. He hasn't entered a plea yet. But I don't know that he's, I mean, yeah, Snowden, Chelsea Manning their motivations were very much political, whether you call them a whistleblower or not. I mean, I think very rational, well-intended people could come to differing views on whether or not they are, and that's a separate conversation. This guy, what's so baffling to me is what he did here wasn't really rooted in ideology at all,
as far as we know, I would say. But yeah,
as far as we know right now, yes. But I'm trying to sort of describe the nuance of this here that I think is going on. I mean, there's part of this story that I think speaks to the greater issue that our society has with disaffected young men, you know, looking for communities in kind of bad and toxic places like online. I haven't thought enough about that to really sort of say anything definitive of what was going on there.
But it's something to be said for them. Yeah.
I think as far as the views, the views and the sentiments that were expressed in this group that he was a part of with these other, I mean, kids like 17, even younger, that he was talking to. Do you know the term edgelord?
I don't actually know. I feel like I should know that, but yeah.
I'll explain it, because I'm sure there are plenty of people listening who don't know what it is. But it's okay. And I mean, this guy is a generation behind me. You're the generation ahead of me. So there is there's kind of a cultural disconnect here that I'm trying to sort of explain, because I think it really speaks to what happened here. But anyway, edgelord is a term that sort of came out of online communities, and it's basically it's a term for someone who deliberately posts and says provocative things online to sort of just be edgy and extreme for the reaction.
Yeah, just a contrarian, basically.
Yes, it's. I think that's a lot of what was going on here, at least with the views of some of these kids who were talking. I mean, no, I don't think 17-year-olds in a gaming Discord or something have really well-developed political ideologies that they're acting on. I think a lot of these people, and I think this is probably true of Jack Teixeira himself, are immature and say and do stupid things that they haven't fully internalized. You know, like they're not... I wouldn't call this guy a neo-Nazi at all. I wouldn't really necessarily even call him far right. He had some anti-establishment views, it seems. He kind of, you know, he and his friends kind of said stupid, racist stuff, you know, that sort of seems just not very well thought through. But I mean, yeah, there's also a huge part of this, which is just a lack of maturity, you know? So he was posting this stuff. The other members of the Discord server called him like the OG. I guess that was his handle on this Discord server. So he was like, I guess, sort of the leader of this Discord server or something. But he was posting, it seems to be that from a lot of the reporting, that he was posting these classified documents to sort of show these younger kids in this group, like, this is what's really going on out in the world, you know, like this is how it really is. And I want to show, from his standpoint, like, yeah, I want to show you what's really going on out there. And also so that they would think that these younger kids would think that he was cool. I mean, that's, again, getting back to what's so frustrating and aggravating to me is that it wasn't, I mean, yeah, Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, they had points that they were trying to make. They were trying to affect some kind of a change in intelligence community policy and stuff, you know, and we can say what we want about those views and what those intentions were, but they had an intention, they had a point in doing this. You know, this kid didn't. He just did it because he wanted people, these teenagers online, to think he was cool. You know, and I think that it also just gets back to the vetting issue. I mean, if you're giving someone a fucking top secret security clearance, you should, before you give them this clearance, you should know that they're posting stupid racist shit to their 17-year-old friends online. You know, don't be concerned about whether or not he smoked marijuana once when he was 15 or whether he might be gay. That's not a concern. The concern is he posting stupid racist shit online? Does he lack the maturity to understand that I took an oath to protect and safeguard this classified national defense information? I can't screw this up. And also, I have the understanding of all the terrible things that are that'll happen to me if I do screw up. You know, like, was that thought process just not there at all? I mean, did no one sort of? I've never applied for a security clearance. I don't believe I ever will, but I would think that when you get one, you're heavily briefed on, these are the safeguards you must take to protect this information, and if this information gets out because of your actions, intended or not, these are the bad things that'll happen to you. These are the statutes that you're violating. This is the prison time that you're facing. Like, was that not conveyed to him, that, you know, he would think, oh yeah, I'm going to print out these classified documents and take them home and take pictures of them and post them online for months? Just where was that disconnect, and where did it fall apart? Yeah. And that's why I said there needs to be a colonoscopy run on this whole damn unit.
Oh yeah, the whole vetting counterintelligence side has really failed here, and we'll go into maybe that in a moment. I mean, because these documents were online for months and they weren't detected by the Air Force or the FBI or anybody. It was journalists who broke the story that led to the investigation. And it's just shocking and appalling that it goes back to, kind of reminds that James Bond film where I think it's Goldeneye, where Judi Dench says we prefer not to learn bad information from CNN. It's like, because they're talking about the real-time spy satellite they have, and she says we'd rather not be reliant on CNN for our information. And it's so true, and it is appalling. So I wonder, so there's a few things that pop out a little bit still, because I'm a bit obsessed with anti-authority, anti-government mindset. My interest and point is, one would think anybody with that point of view, who expresses that point of view, who's part of the military, intelligence, security services, should that not be a point of concern? So obviously I don't know whether it was apparent in his behavior he held those views, or was he wearing an Illuminati t-shirt on his time off? I don't know. There's so many things I don't know at this point, but knowing what I've seen online chatter from, should we say, some former special forces people and stuff like that, these anti-authority, anti-government views are quite common, and I wonder if there's a weird cultural disconnect in the military where if somebody expresses those views, we just see it as blowing off steam rather than, should we say, raising an eyebrow and just looking a bit deeper at it. Because some people express all sorts of stuff to blow off steam, but there's certainly a point where just for a bit of nuance and thinking about it, you can tell when somebody's blowing off steam when somebody sort of means it, if you know what I mean. And there's something lacking somewhere and all that. But yeah,
I think all large professional militaries, of course the U.S. military is among those, reflects, at any given point in history, reflects broadly the beliefs and anxieties of the society of that country as a whole. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's a good segment of the population who harbors kind of anti-establishment, kind of edgy, alt, racist views, prone to conspiratorial thinking. I mean, that's how our society is in the U.S. right now. So of course the military is going to reflect that to a degree, because the military is recruited from our society. I think the military has always had these issues. I mean, like those stories that U.S. GIs in the lead up to D-Day who were stationed in England asked pub owners, hey, can you not let in Black American GIs to this pub because, where we come from, it's segregated and we don't like their kind in here. And the English pub owners rightfully were like, no, fuck off. We're not doing that. So even back then, during World War II, the Greatest Generation and all that kind of stuff, those issues were still in our military because they reflected they reflected the society that they were coming from. And that's still true here.
Yeah. Well, Timothy McVeigh pops into my head as well.
Right.
Yeah. Because he I think he started wearing like a white pride t-shirt to challenge black servicemen who wore black pride t-shirts or something. And it was a slippery slope from there. And then obviously he got a lot of training through his military background, which led to, to him being able to make explosives for the Oklahoma bombing and stuff. And very, very interesting character. So what we'll do, we'll segue now into sort of what the documents showed. So this, I'm going to use a BBC article by Paul Adams called What the Pentagon Documents Reveal. This is a good title, that, for the BBC. So recently leaked classified US documents shed light on American intelligence gathered about other countries. The key takeaways are, so the US believed that the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, was too accommodating to Russian interests, which undermined attempt to hold Russia accountable for the war in Ukraine. One leaked document outlined how Ukraine's stockpile of missiles was running out and required urgent resupplies. Then we have the Jordanian government was reportedly worried about retaliation from China if they kept Huawei out of their 5G rollout plans. And the Jordanian government was also concerned about Chinese cyber attack capabilities. We also found out that Russian officials are at odds over reporting casualties in the Ukraine war, with the FSB accusing the Defense Ministry of downplaying the human impact. And we've got allegedly Western special forces forces are operating inside Ukraine, with the UK having the largest contingent, followed by Latvia, France, the US, and Netherlands. The US have expressed doubts about Ukraine's chances of success in their counteroffensive due to problems with generating and sustaining sufficient force. Another revelation is that Egypt secretly planned to supply rockets to Russia in exchange for unspecified help, with President al-Sisi telling officials to keep production and shipments secret to avoid problems with the West. So there we can see where his loyalties lie. And then South Korea was torn between US pressure to send ammunition to Ukraine and their policy not to arm other countries at war. And also China tested one of its experimental missiles, the DF-27 hypersonic glide vehicle, of the 25th of February, which flew for over 12 minutes at a distance of 2,100 kilometers. Finally, does anybody remember the Rivet joint spy plane that a Russian missile was released in the presence of? Well, apparently the Russians actually were trying to shoot down that plane, and that would have killed probably about 18 British service people. And luckily, because the missile was crap, it didn't manage to blow up that plane. So those are some of the revelations that have kind of come out. Yeah.
The Russians were actually trying to shoot down that RAF aircraft. It wasn't just an accidental thing.
Apparently so, yeah. Apparently so.
Big.
And it was only because the missile was faulty. Yeah.
That's
so
big.
These are sort of things that have been revealed. So obviously the thing is, these are intelligence reports that are not 100% accurate themselves, because it's intelligence gathered that's then been pumped out raw. But it's pretty, you could probably say that the majority of it has a pretty high accuracy rate. But you do still have to take everything with a pinch of salt, even when intelligence is leaked. It's still, it's like with the Steele dossier, there's a lot of truth to it, and at the same time there's a lot of speculation in there too, because intelligence is imperfect. But so all these things are going to take a little bit of a pinch of salt, but it's some interesting stuff. So Matt, do you have any thoughts on these sort of revelations, and obviously the journey of how these leaks came out?
Yeah, there was a point early on, before we knew that it was this airman who was responsible for it. I think one of the first documents that surfaced on a pro-Russian Telegram channel were casualty estimates of the Russian and Ukrainian armies, respectively. And the casualty estimates, I guess, were just blatantly doctored to show that the Ukrainians had far more casualties than the Russians. And that was, so I think at first there was some concern or thought that this was a Russian misinformation operation. And it was sort of found out later that I think that those numbers in that image were doctored by a pro-Russian account that I will get into a bit later. There were a few interesting bits in here. Like, I read these articles, and I've been looking at several of the documents myself, like the actual documents that I got a hold of. I think it really shows the scope and the breadth of U.S. intelligence gathering around the world. It certainly shows our penetration of the Russian military, Russian security services, that we're able to know as much as we do, like the internal deliberations in Moscow with high-ranking officials. That's very interesting. There are a few interesting points that stood out to me. There was one assessment of the UK's plan to base a Royal Navy, one of the Queen Elizabeth class carriers in the Western Pacific to help counter China. And there were assessments of how Beijing would react to if a Labour government was elected after the next general election. That's really interesting. There was another account of casualties taken by a GRU subordinated Spetsnaz unit. It's the 22nd Independent Spetsnaz Brigade. There was overhead imagery of their garrison outside Rostov in southwestern Russia. And this is really interesting. So there was there's overhead imagery of the garrison from before, when the Spetsnaz unit deployed to Ukraine, and then when they returned last summer. And the imagery looks at the motor pool, and after they returned, this motor pool is like half empty, And there's estimates that this Spetsnaz brigade has a 90 to 95% attrition rate from its deployment in Ukraine last summer, which, I mean, I would have to think back to like World War II when you'd see units like this just being almost just annihilated. That's really shocking to see. Just 90 to 95% for
matches up. Yeah, matches up with some things people have said on this podcast in the past. Actually, I mean, like Dr. Taras Kuzio and I think Malcolm Nance, who'd been out there, and a few other people. So it sort of matches up with what picture we've been getting over the last few months.
The story about the Egyptians deliberating whether or not to sell rockets to the Russians is, I think, to me, probably the most concerning bit there. I mean, if there's any sort of silver lining in it, the intelligence reporting that revealed this also said that we got wind of it and we sort of confronted the Egyptians and persuaded them not to sell rockets to the Russians. But to me, just that they would consider doing that and to hide it is a serious concern. I mean, Egypt is a country that we spend all kinds of money supplying weapons to, so why are we supplying weapons to a country that then supplies them to Russia?
It's probably a bit like the Pakistan thing from a few years back with all the billions of aid, only to find out that bin Laden was living in Pakistan.
Right, exactly. I mean, if anything, if there's a reason why here, it's Egypt is just another member of this collection of autocratic governments in the Middle East, that it includes the UAE, the Saudis, that are sort of, I guess, reflected of this axis of autocracies in competition with liberal democracies. That's concerning to me. Those are the big takeaways that I had. I mean, if there's a lot of this stuff it was stuff that was prepared for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, mostly last winter for the Joint Staff. And the Joint Staff is a huge organization, mostly based in the Pentagon, but there's chunks of it that are based down around the Hampton Roads area in Virginia, but includes hundreds of people. A lot of this was briefing materials prepared for the Joint Staff. I had the sense, before we knew who the leaker was, that someone lost a briefing book for Mark Milley, and that's where this stuff was coming from. A lot of it is it's finished intelligence products that incorporate a lot of different collection sources. They're talked explicitly about stuff being gathered from signals intelligence. There's stuff from the CIA that suggests that there were human sources behind some of the collection. Talks a lot about the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, who runs all the overhead reconnaissance satellites. So I think you would think that just because these are finished intelligence products that are being leaked, that it wouldn't really expose sources and methods to that degree if it was just raw reporting. That's not quite the case, though, from what I understand. I mean, if you're the Russians or the Chinese and this stuff is leaked, and even if it's like, okay, it says, we collected this information from signals intelligence or from reporting from a human asset, just knowing that, you're sort of able to reverse engineer that information flow. And I mean, it's not a big challenge for a nation's security services to track down where this information came from. And that's what I think will make this so damaging in the long run, potentially.
Oh, yeah, totally on that point. I mean, there's going to be a lot of sources who've been working for the Western intelligence services who are connected to Russia, who are probably very nervous at the moment, and their lives are in danger, because if they do get caught, the tradition is, obviously, once they've been through their due process and found to be a traitor, is usually a bullet to the back of the head in Russia. That's usually what the fate of spies is.
We can't recruit sources to betray their country if the potential sources don't believe that we're able to protect them, And if we're allowing idiot kids like this to get top secret level security clearances and leak it to his gaming buddies, no, we can protect them. And that's why the vetting process is so important.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know, wildly speculative and controversial. It just pops into my mind, which is probably not always a good thing. But it's interesting the difference in a lot of these leaks do unfortunately seem to come from America, because the American intelligence services are so large and complex. I think there's too many people get access to stuff. And certainly there've been a lot less leaks of this kind from the UK and some of the European partners. I mean, saying that, we had the whole B&D scandal a few months ago, so that sort of goes against that. But this sort of like 20-year-old IT guy hacker type dude does seem to be a very American thing at the moment, but I'm sure that will change. But it's just quite interesting.
Yeah. That's another part that just so aggravates me, that this keeps happening here.
Yeah.
You know, and if MI6, if GCHQ kept having these, you know, big leaks of classified information, if it was a German intelligence agency or a French intelligence agency, we in the US, we would stop sharing intelligence with them. You know, why should that be any different for you guys? It shouldn't.
Well, this is it. I mean, imagine if you were an MI6, you know, a source in Russia who gets completely blown just because of something like this. It's nothing even to do with MI6. It's to do with the Five Eyes and all that.
Exactly. And if you're the MI6 officer whose job it is to handle this, you know, this potential Russian source, how do you protect your asset against that? You can't. You can't. You have no control over what random weird gaming kid has a top secret security clearance in Massachusetts. You know, that's what's just so aggravating about the whole thing.
Yeah, it's bad. And I'm sure now Russian counterintelligence will be working on overdrive to figure out how the West has been getting intelligence on internal conflicts and stuff, and human sources are definitely at risk. But there was an interview I was listening to on Spy-Right, the podcast, and the guest on there was talking about likewise even these counterintelligence efforts being doubled by the Russians will probably lead to internal resentment and potentially more assets for the West in the future as they recruit disgruntled servicemen and women from Russian forces and intelligence. So Russia might be going through their James Jesus Angleton moment, and the CIA, MI6, etc. might be able to benefit from that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Slight silver lining to that cloud. Yeah. On Egypt, one observation I had, I don't know if this is valid or useful, but Russia obviously benefiting greatly from American foreign policy decisions that have led to a rise of anti-American sentiment in the Middle East and Africa.
Right.
So we can see that they are definitely exploiting that. I'm intrigued what support Russia had given Egypt for their government to be so pro-Russia and want to kind of give missiles to Russia and keep it a secret from America. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what that might be. But the
Egyptians during the Cold War were allied with the Soviet Union for a while. So that relationship goes back a while. You had the other point about Africa. And one of the stories that were in these leaks was that the GRU, so that's Russian military intelligence, was planning a propaganda campaign in African countries to sort of turn public support against leaders who support the Ukrainians, right? Specifically with the goal of discrediting the U.S. and France, I guess, because it's, you know, historically a major colonial power in Africa. And one of the strategies there was to plant stories in African media outlets to discredit Ukraine. And that's when I saw that's an old Cold War tactic going back. You know, the KGB would plant stories about how the CIA created AIDS. You know, or
I remember that one. Yeah,
or created, you know, was sort of in the crack cocaine business back in the 80s and stuff. Yeah, so the KGB would plant these stories in media outlets in Africa, elsewhere in the third world, really kind of off the beaten path places, and then would have that disinformation sort of percolate back up into sort of major Western media outlets. So it would just sort of be laundered in a way, and that sort of those fingerprints that the Russians had wouldn't be on it so much. Is that I saw that, and that was like, yeah, that's a very classic Cold War spy thing. to do. Of course, now with the internet, it can take seconds for that stuff to spread.
Quick thing on the Cold War tactics. I'll just say to listeners, I'm assuming not every listener's listened to every episode of this podcast, but in series 1, I interviewed Todd Leventhal from the State Department, and he was in charge of the unit that kind of countered Russian propaganda, and he talks a little bit in detail about how those Russian propaganda efforts sort of worked, and then how they feed into modern conspiracy theory culture and so on. It was a bit of a guarded interview because he still worked for the State Department at the time of recording, but there's some very interesting tidbits in there about some kind of Cold War stuff like the AIDS stories you've just mentioned and other ones as well. So listeners, do check that out, and I'll put a link in the show notes for that.
Yeah, there were a lot of interesting points about the Wagner Group in these leaks too. There were stories about their efforts in Africa, which have been going on for a while. There was also a report in there about the Wagner Group approaching officials in Haiti to sort of come in and help them combat, the gangs that in the last couple of years have taken over, huge chunks of the country. That's really interesting to me, and just how the regular Russian military is just so reliant on the Wagner Group now to operate. I think we're kind of at a point where, I don't know, it seems like the Wagner Group is kind of analogous at this point to the SS under Nazi Germany, like this super fanatical paramilitary wing of the ruling party. They're not the same thing. They're organized differently. They operate differently, but I think the Wagner Group are sort of operating in that same space now that the SS did under the Nazis. A lot of the reporting for the worst atrocities that we've seen in Ukraine have been committed by the Wagner Group. Just as the worst atrocities during World War II was committed by the SS.
And many Wagner Group members have like SS tattoos on them, so they're clearly fans.
Yeah, which is you think back to like how far we've come, that the Russians are kind of just emulating the SS in this way. The Russians, who should just have in their cultural DNA, who face the worst of what the Nazi Party had to offer. That was all on the Eastern Front, the Einsatzgruppe, and all those massacres, the mass graves, taking whole villages and locking them in barns and setting them on fire. That was all perpetrated by the Nazis on Russian people.
Yeah.
And this is how we've turned around now. And now they have, the SS rune tattoos on them.
Yeah, it's so bizarre.
It's very strange.
It is. I can understand. Like, I'm of the view that the line between communism and fascism is not, is much closer than a lot of people like to admit. And I jokingly say that communism just has better healthcare. But the symbols, surely, considering, there, as you've said just now, there's been many countless examples of where Russians have been murdered by Nazis and the SS. You would have thought at least the symbols would still resonate in a bad way through culture. In Britain, to some extent,
yes.
We've got so many World War II movies, and how I'm trying to write a World War II TV show just to add to that. But, World War II is so ingrained in our culture that almost everybody, just about, if you threw a swastika in their face, they would instantly have a reaction, usually a negative emotional reaction. There is a small part of the population that probably might not, but the majority, I would have liked to believe, would have a negative reaction to that. And it's but with this whole Wagner Group thing, it just seems to be embedded in their culture. It's a bit like, remember we were talking about the German B&D scandal. I think we mentioned in the episode, or it certainly was in my notes, whether we did mention it or not, the German special forces had to be disbanded because so many members of German special forces were collecting Nazi memorabilia, had Nazi tattoos, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. As I've been sort of saying, there seems to be this connection from time to time with Russia presenting itself as the savior of the white Christian world, and somehow these symbols are kind of in that sort of cocktail of nastiness that seems to lead to people to supporting Russia, and it's so bizarre. And I don't know exactly where that started. Is that a 90s thing? Is that since Putin came into power that this is sort of happened? I can't really say, but or has it always been in the culture and the background? I mean, certainly for Germany's history, it's sadly a part of their history, so it will be a little bit in their culture. But for Russia and Russians to start getting Nazi tattoos and SS tattoos, I don't know quite where that started, really. It's very weird.
It feels very recent. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen any. I don't know if there are any good studies out there about, public opinion in Russia when these sentiments kind of boiled up. But just sort of observing these developments over the years, to me, it seems that like 2012-ish was kind of, I think, when we took a really bad turn in Russia. I mean, when Putin came back after Medvedev, when he came back, I think we really started to see that change in Russian society. And I mean, even in the last year or so since the war in Ukraine broke out, I mean, I think you've just seen a transformation of Russian society. I mean, I don't know that I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I remember seeing last summer, it was a video of it was on Twitter somewhere, a video of a Russian woman in London, just sort of harassing and screaming at this Ukrainian person on the street. And I think, that Russian woman in London is not trapped in a propaganda bubble. She has access to all the same information that you and I and anyone listening to this podcast does. She's not a prisoner of Russian state media. It gets to a point where, like, you make a choice to buy into this stuff. You make a choice to believe this crazy shit and act this way. You're not just a victim of propaganda. And I think, when this war is over, quoting Apocalypse Now, someday this war is going to end. Again, going back to the World War II analogy, after the fall of Nazism, every German on an individual level had to demonstrate how they were not like those people, how they were not like the SS. And Germany to this day goes out of its way to show that, like, no, that's not us. We're not like that. I think there's going to have to be that reckoning within Russian society after this,
Oh no, definitely.
Which I think just makes it so daunting to see how and where this ends, No,
indeed. That's a good point. Shall we? I feel like I want to move into
cheery episode today.
I know. Well, I'm gonna just put a cherry on the cake of this story because it's another topic about it's still on topic of leaks and US military people who appear to be pro-Russia. We have this fascinating piece about a former US Navy non-commissioned officer who became a prominent online voice supporting Russia's war in Ukraine. So we've got an article by Yaroslav Trofimov from the Wall Street Journal, and it's titled "Social Media Account Overseen by Former Navy Non-Commissioned Officer Helps Spread Secrets." So Russian blogger known as the Donbass Duveshka, which translates as Donbass Girl, played a key role in the spread of the intelligence documents spread by Airman First Class Jack Teixeira, our new best bud. And this Telegram account posted 4 of the alleged leaked classified documents to its 65,000 followers on April the 5th. And the blog is the face of a pro-Kremlin social media, podcasting, and merchandise and fundraising accounts. And but the person who's been hosting this podcast and overseeing this account is actually a Washington state-based former U.S. enlisted aviation electronics technician whose name is Sarah Bills. And Sarah Bills is a former U.S. Navy non-commissioned officer. She only recently left the Navy, and after a demotion, which we don't really know what that demotion was about, but she left with an honourable discharge. There is no evidence that she used her security clearance to access secrets and spread information online, but she did have a security clearance. But when Miss Bills was interviewed, she actually said, "I obviously know the gravity of top secret classified materials. We didn't leak them," is what she said. So at least she knew not to do that. And she's now being investigated by the Department of Justice as a probe into how leaked Pentagon documents appeared online. And the fact that she isn't Russian was actually discovered. This is the bit I love. Was discovered by pro-Ukrainian open source intelligence analysts from NAFO, which stands for North Atlantic Fellow Organization.
I love those guys.
I love them too. I've got some of their cups. And the Ukrainian group were able to unmask bills thanks to yet another unusual side hustle. Now, get ready for this. So aside from serving in the Navy, she also ran a business selling tropical fish and imported food from Poland. And apparently, in June 2020, she appeared on a popular podcast about fish tanks, and that proved to be her undoing. And that's what NAFO found, and that's how they found out that she wasn't Russian. So, so there you go. So if you're going to pretend to be Russian, don't go on a podcast talking about tropical fish. So Matt, any thoughts on this lovely story?
We should get her on to talk about the fish.
I know we should.
We should do it.
We're a Russian fish specialists. Want to talk about sturgeon?
Yeah. Yeah, that'll put everyone to sleep.
Sturgeon's very nice with cream cheese, by the way. I had it on a bagel once, and it was good.
That's it. Nice. Yeah, this is another glaring counterintelligence security issue. This one was a naval aviator based in a Growler squadron at Whidbey Island in Washington. I think her connection that we know of thus far, so this Jack Teixeira and sort of his crew were originally on a I am going to get back to this leaker in a second here. I'm looping it back around. Jack Teixeira and his crew were part of a larger Discord server devoted to this guy, this online persona. His name's Oxide, who is he's active duty military still, but he posts a lot of like gun reviews and stuff on YouTube. Nothing really wrong with that. So they were all sort of in this Discord that are all fans of this Oxide character, and they would talk about it and stuff. And then Jack Teixeira and sort of some other people left and made another Discord, a smaller Discord server that they named after this gay porn meme. Again, speaks to their maturity. And that's sort of where a lot of this stuff was posted. They had a channel on this Discord server. It was Bear versus Pig, I think, which I guess the bear is Russian. I'm not sure what the pig's supposed to stand for. But yeah, pro-Russian sentiments going on there. And a lot of these documents were placed on this channel on the Discord server. And then from there, it sort of migrated onto other people sort of taking this stuff that Jack had posted, migrated onto a Minecraft gaming discussion kind of server, and then to pro-Russian Telegram accounts, which is where the image with the doctored Ukrainian casualty estimates were. And I believe that was posted by this Donbass Devushka woman. So that's her connection to this, we believe, right? Yeah, and from there, I don't get it. Just like the American service members who do this weird pro-Russian cosplay shit. Like just go over there. Like move, leave.
Do a Steven Seagal.
Right, yeah. Or who's the French guy who's over there too?
Yeah.
Gerard Depardieu.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Is that him?
That is him. Yeah, that's him.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, leave. Get the fuck out. If you want to go do this weird kind of fascist cosplay thing, go. Get in the trenches, go. It's I don't understand it. Again, a massive counterintelligence and security issue that the Pentagon really needs to get their shit in order, because it's bad and it can't keep happening.
Well, I want to find out more about her, because I suspect she's going to fit that profile I mentioned earlier, where she has these anti-progressive views and stuff like that. I will put money on it that she is, when we find out when we find out what she's been, what her personal views are. I bet they're going to be quite ugly. I could be wrong, and I
Yeah.
apologise in advance if I am. To Miss Bills, and I'll get her a sturgeon bagel as a compensation for this. But or if she doesn't want to eat fish, I'll happily get her another kind of bagel. But I don't know. These pro-Putin individuals within the ranks. We've got it here. In the UK, we had that security guard from the British Embassy. There are others. Yeah. It's just it's this sort of appeal, this reach that Putinism has. And so in my notes, I've kind of already said it, but Putin and his propaganda have done a good job aligning themselves with conservative politics in the West and Christian evangelicals. And I will just say, as a disclaimer, that I have met many US conservatives and Christian evangelicals who don't subscribe to Putinism. So there aren't really any easy answers.
No.
But the thing is, they do.
The vast majority do not.
Yeah, but every person who seems to be pro-Putin just seems to tick these boxes again and again and again.
Yes.
And there's a commonality there. So I think the counterintelligence people just need to kind of up their game a bit. It's, it's not people who smoke marijuana in tie-dye shirts you should be worried about. If anything, to some extent, they might be on your side, actually. But so yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, I guess to your point about, Russian sympathies being kind of endemic in certain conservative circles in the US, I'm reminded of the reaction to this stuff when this first came out. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson come out and defend this kid, saying, he's a whistleblower, which is just bizarre to me that your knee-jerk reaction for a congressman and Tucker Carlson would be to, say, oh, what he did kind of had some merit here. When even the people who were in this Discord server with him kind of said, no, he's not a whistleblower. He had no real kind of political motivation or ideology behind doing this. He just did it because he thought it was, cool. Yeah, very, very weird how that goes there. Marjorie Taylor Greene also with this leaked information about the U.S. having 14 special forces members operating inside Ukraine. She tried to come out and say that this was like this kind of huge revelation that the Biden administration is lying and we have boots on the ground or something. I mean, these 14 special forces operators are detailed to the defense attaché's office at the embassy in Kyiv to sort of do oversight for a lot of the arms shipments and stuff, the aid that we're providing. So, I mean, boots on the ground, this is not. But I mean, yeah, some of these people like the Donbass Devushka that we just talked about, or is it, Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson. I mean, I'm not going to suggest that they're actually on the take from the Russians. There's no evidence of that. I'm not saying, but I think we're kind of at the point where if they're not, they should consider asking to be compensated for their services because they're basically doing the job anyway.
Yeah. Or what's the term? Useful idiot, isn't it? That's the term.
Yeah, that's it. That's the term there.
Yeah, obviously, idiot's not a judgment, but that's the term that's used to describe people who unknowingly are doing the bidding for another country against yours.
Yeah.
So our next story is about an Australian businessman who was allegedly given envelopes of cash from Chinese spies for information. And that is also the title of the article I'm basing this on, by the Australian Associated Press for the Guardian newspaper. So Alexander Sergo, an Australian businessman who worked in China, has been accused of accepting envelopes of cash from suspected Chinese spies in exchange for handwritten reports on Australia's foreign alliances. The reports allegedly covered Australian defences, economic and national security arrangements, as well as topics as the AUKUS and Quad alliances, and also information on lithium mining in Australia and the iron ore risk, which is quite interesting. For those not to know, AUKUS is the new submarine agreement between Australia, UK, and USA. For some reason, I seem to call it AUKUS, but it is AUKUS. And the Quad is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which is a strategic security dialogue between Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. And that is maintained by talks between the member countries. So Sergo is said to have met with suspected Chinese spies known as Ken and Evelyn, and this was during the Shanghai's extended COVID-19 lockdown. So whilst other people were watching Netflix, he was doing this. And he was arrested and charged on Friday of last week after weeks of questioning by the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation and federal police, during which his phone and laptop was searched. Sergo apparently suspected Ken and Evelyn were spies soon after meeting them, but remained in contact with them for 2 years. And he allegedly had covert communication with 2 other individuals in preparing the reports that he made for them. His lawyer, Bernard Collery, suggests that the reports were not sinister and based on public sourced information. And also apparently Sergo's own creative efforts, which kind of brings back the, not Taylor of Panama, what's the other one? The original, the Graham Greene one, with Alec Guinness. Oh my goodness.
The Quiet American?
No, the one with the Hoover salesman who sells the information. Our Man in Havana. That's it. Our Man in Havana.
Yes.
So it has shades of Our Man in Havana a little bit. And apparently bail has been denied, and Sergo is now due back in court in June. So Matt, I don't know if you had any thoughts on this story.
Well, I mean, to your point, yeah, everyone sort of had their pandemic hobby. Mine was cooking and gardening. This guy had treason and espionage. It's a classic spy story. Yeah. I think the motivation here, it seems it might have been more money than it was ideology here. I don't see much in here that would suggest ideology. I think it's more just money and just greed. Yeah, very classic spy story. The Chinese trying to garner influence with a connected businessman in Australia to then support back, to then report, back to them on issues that they're interested in. The Australians have been facing this issue for a while. I think as in one of the previous episodes we talked about the Australians rolling up a spy ring in the country. I don't believe in those reports they said specifically the country that was behind it. I think it was the head of Australian intelligence who said, right. But he didn't name the country. But reading between the lines, it felt like China. They're in a sustained confrontation with the Chinese now. I mean, China's trying to exert influence throughout the Indo-Pacific region, and Australia's right there. And I think it just speaks to the importance of deals like AUKUS to bring the Australians more into the fold there. They're much closer to the proverbial front lines of this issue than you and I are.
Massively, yeah.
What were your thoughts on it?
Cool? Well, yeah, I'm curious about the nature of the information he passed on to these Chinese spies, because he's supposedly a businessman, so I don't believe he had any top secret clearance or anything like that, but it doesn't count out that he might have known some people who did. So I am intrigued to see what the court case will bring out. Obviously some aspects might be kept under wraps for forevermore, but obviously he was so if he was only giving information that was sort of from publicly available sources, then I think that isn't that legally questionable in terms of you're going to charge him. You could probably charge him for accepting cash from foreign spies and give him whatever the standard sentence is for that, but for the information it must be a bit tricky.
Yeah, I think I know nothing about Australian espionage laws, but I think even if the information that you're handing over isn't classified, legally protected in that manner, just the act of espionage, specifically accepting money, I think that's where he's really going to get nailed here. Accepting money from Chinese intelligence agents in exchange for this information, I think that's where the illegality comes in.
Yeah, indeed. And it's not apparent. I've not seen anything to say he was compromised. So it does seem to be money is the motivation here on our mice chart. So we will see. But you never know. There might be some story where he got up to something and was probably caught with his pants down or something. But who knows? We'll find out more, I'm sure, as this story develops. So on our final topic for today. We're going to go to the North Sea and join a Russian spy ship, or a Russian spy shit, as I accidentally called it earlier. So there's two very good articles about this. One of them is titled "Ukraine War: The Russian Spy Ship Accused of North Sea Sabotage" by Gordon Carrera for the BBC, and then there's another article by Jodie Harrison for the Herald of Scotland, which is just titled "Russian Spy Ship Probed Wind Farm for Sabotage Plans." So just to break these two articles down into one. So a Russian spy ship named Admiral Vladimirsky stopped off sites off the coast of Scotland as parts of plans to sabotage key energy infrastructure, an investigation by European broadcasters claims. A joint report by broadcasters in Denmark, Sweden, Finland and Norway claims the Admiral Vladimirsky was part of an operation to map undersea structure. The Danish broadcaster DR has published a video of an encounter at sea between a small boat carrying their team and the Russian ship, filmed off the Danish coast in November. The report focuses on the ship, the Admiral Vladimirsky, and officially this ship is an expeditionary oceanographic ship, or an underwater research vessel, but the report alleges that it is in fact a Russian spy ship. It says the vessel slows down when it approaches areas where there are wind farms and loiters in the area, and it said it sailed for months with its transmitter turned off. So when the reporter in that video I mentioned earlier, when the reporter approached the ship in a small boat, he was confronted by a masked man carrying what appeared to be a military assault rifle. In February, Dutch intelligence issued an unusual official warning about activity that could indicate preparation for disruption or sabotage of marine infrastructure. The head of the country's military intelligence said a Russian ship had been detected near a wind farm in the North Sea and was mapping out sites. Danish counterintelligence officer says the sabotage plans are being prepared in case of full conflict with the West. So reconnaissance of sensitive sites is not unusual, and Western countries will likely be carrying out similar activity against Russia. The intention is likely to have a series of options available should a conflict escalate. And one option might be to damage communications or take down a country's power system to cause chaos. And then the report raises the possibility that such vessels were linked to the Nord Stream attack last year. So, Matt, I don't know if you have any thoughts on Russian spy ships. There's certainly been some off the coast of America. There was something last year, wasn't there, I think, off the East Coast or off the coast of Alaska, there was something suspicious floating around.
Yeah, this was very interesting to me. I'm glad you included this in here. I believe I saw recently that Admiral Vladimirsky was off the coast of Norfolk now or recently. The Russians have sort of been, even back during the Cold War, have sort of been famous for these, in quotes, fishing trawlers. They call them that, are, just spy ships. There's a few different classes of them. This, as you said, is officially like an oceanographic research vessel. If there's one thing that really surprises me about this story is, the guy who comes out in the balaclava and the Kalashnikov on the deck of the ship. It interested me to see that, I guess, the crew was so like openly militarized. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like, my expectation would be that there would just be an attempt to have some sort of civilian cover to these efforts. So that's interesting.
Yes, I know. Yeah, it is. It was quite obvious, wasn't it?
They're out in the open ocean. I don't think they would expect to be like attacked or something, like why they would have armed people up on the deck. That's interesting. But it reminds me of, when I had Shane Harris on the podcast last month to talk about the investigation into the Nord Stream bombing in the Baltic Sea. And a lot of the anxieties that sort of surfaced here were the vulnerabilities to these undersea networks in the North Sea and the Baltic, possibly the English Channel, the Irish Sea too. That a lot of these networks are really vulnerable. They're just sitting down there on the bottom of the ocean. They're just kind of there, just sitting, and it doesn't take much. That doesn't take a force of much sophistication to sever them or do them damage. It's not just oil and gas pipelines. It's wind farms. Like this article talks about, or it's electrical transmission cables or fiber optic lines. there's a lot down there, and yeah, it's all very vulnerable. And if, knock on wood, if there's an actual shooting war between Russia and NATO at some point in the future, you'll see these assets get hit first. They'll be the first to go.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the Russians even have a special submarine called the Belgorod that supposedly has midget submarines within it that can be deployed for such operations. The only thing I will say, obviously, those cables are very vulnerable. When I looked into this last year, obviously, the internet cables are so vast that I think most mainland countries, it would take more than one cable to be cut to cause a massive internet problem like in Britain, because there's quite a big network. Same with Europe as well. But obviously, if there was a concerted effort to cut a lot of cables at the same time, that could overwhelm things. It's more kind of small islands and things that are off the coast of the mainland that sort of are more at risk, like the Orkney Islands or the Shetland Islands. That could be quite a bad thing for them if they lost the internet, or if they somehow lost power, they could be without that for weeks. But I think for that to happen on a mass scale, I think that would be almost we'd be in a shooting war at that point, surely, and it'll probably be the last thing on our mind, worrying about shit. My Wi-Fi's gone down because being in the bunker, the Wi-Fi is not going to be very useful, I don't think. But not that I have a bunker, but if one could, maybe I should, but I don't know. Pimp my bunker, but there we go. So no, it is obviously concerning, and yes, you're right, it has been recently spotted off the coast of Norfolk, but it's the presence of the ship with armed personnel on board that makes me feel uneasy, because it does raise questions about what might happen if someone in a private boat who's unaware of the ship's significance happened to be in the vicinity of this ship and they didn't know that they happened to be going past a spy ship. So yeah, good
opening scene for a spy novel there.
I think so, yeah. Well, actually, do you know what? Yeah. Was it the beginning of For Your Eyes Only starts on a British spy ship, doesn't it? That has the ATAC system that they have to recover. And I always liked that opening. I remember as a kid actually quite liking the opening of that film and some of the underwater aspects of it. But well, Matt, I think we'll sail off into the sunset as we've come to, I think, the end of today's episode. So thank you very much for your time. Do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom, or anything else you'd like to share with us before we part company today?
Oh, I would just reach back to my heavy belabored sigh at the beginning of this episode. That's kind of how I felt this whole way through. We have a problem with these leaks, with the protection of classified information in this country, and we have got to get it under control. And people need to be brought to account for this. I mean, more than just this dumb kid who posted this stuff online. We need a whole overhaul of our vetting system, because it's clearly not working. Not working.
Yeah, I remember, and unfortunately I can't. I've tried to find this clip in the past and have had no success. But there was some talk at a conference Julian Assange was physically at. So it was before he ended up in the embassy. And before he ended up in Belmarsh, where he basically, there was a conference for like hackers and hacktivists, that kind of people. And he was recommending people in this crowd who are in their 20s to do everything they could to join the Western intelligence services or the CIA, and then leak as much information as they could and leak it to him. I remember that. And I do wonder sometimes if anybody of that time and that generation did end up trying to do that or not. I do wonder sometimes, but or whether it will inspire somebody to do that in the future. You never know.
I know.
You never know.
I mean, I think this kid is facing, I wrote this down somewhere, I think he's facing like 10 to 15 years in prison if he's convicted on all the counts. And I mean, he's only 21. He'll have a life after this. But I don't know. It's just dumb.
Yeah, very dumb. I mean, he's made it very difficult because he's, to get employed in certain ways. But who knows what world he'll be in 15 years' time. He might end up becoming a best-selling author. What else happens to a lot of these people? I mean, it's like that Carl Rittenhouse guy who ended up... became a bit of a weird celebrity on the right wing, and stuff like that. So who knows? It's not like he's ending up in a supermax like some really big traitors. But the thing is, he probably, unknowingly may well have cost somebody their lives. That's the scary thing about all this. There's probably an asset somewhere who's very nervous right now because of this leak. I hope to God that they get themselves out of whatever situation they're in as quickly as possible and just get the hell out of Dodge. It's safer.
Yep.
So on that cheery note, we will get out of Dodge ourselves. But thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Don't forget to connect with us on all the socials. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you just type in Secrets and Spies, it will come up. I did an interesting search on ChatGTP the other day for podcast recommendations. And out of the top 50 podcasts it recommended, somehow we're at number 28, which disappointed me slightly there. But there we go.
Huh.
That was,
well, our new AI overlords know we exist.
Yeah, they do. As of apparently the information cover, because I was asking AI a lot of questions about a lot of things, and one of its responses, it came back to me was that it said something along the lines of its knowledge cut off at like the 21st of September 2021 or something like that. So I was using ChatGTP 3.5, I think. Maybe GTP 4 has got a different cutoff date, but no, I've been having a lot of fun with that. So so there we go. So Matt, where can listeners find out more about you and your work?
As always, my website is mattfulton.net, and best way just to reach me on social media is on my Twitter. That's at Fulton Matt, FultonMatt. That's where I'm at.
Nice one. Well, thanks again for your time today, Matt, and thank you everybody for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. This is Secrets and Spies.